Moscow, April 1985. Two men were walking in a quiet square, talking softly. Seizing a convenient moment, one of them took a bottle out of his pocket, sprayed some of its contents into a bag, and handed it to his interlocutor. In response, he received a tightly packed envelope. In just a few hours, a package with an unknown substance will be sent to the United States in the strictest secrecy and immediately sent to a laboratory for examination. One of the participants in that meeting was a CIA officer who worked at the US Embassy disguised as a diplomat. And his interlocutor was a man who had been hunted by the State Security Committee for almost a year and a half. In counterintelligence, the Americans knew him under the pseudonym Cole. And in KGB developments, he went by the codename Two-Faced Genus. Mid-80s. Another round of confrontation between the USSR and the USA. The world is teetering on the brink of a nuclear war. And as if that wasn't enough, a major international scandal erupts in the summer. Sensational articles are published in several American newspapers at once. Allegedly, the KGB uses a toxic, deadly drug to spy on Western diplomats. With the light hand of journalists, it gets the biting name spy dust. The publications look like a newspaper duck, but the Soviet secret services take them seriously, because the State Security Committee really had such a drug at that moment. The mysterious spy dust is a marker that the Soviet secret services actively used in their operational work. If you apply it to clothes, shoes, door handles, car interior upholstery, you can track the entire route of movement of the person of interest. Small particles of the drug carry a clearly distinguishable trace with special equipment. In the arsenal of the State Security Committee, this drug was codenamed Rubin. The very existence of Rubin was classified. The hype in the press meant only one thing. Someone gave the Americans a sample, someone from their own. The KGB learned about the mole in counterintelligence a few months before the articles about spy dust appeared in the Western press. In the spring of 1985, CIA officer Aldrich Ames contacted the Soviet embassy in Washington. The Soviet secret services did not immediately believe in such luck. Ames wasn't just an agent. He headed the counterintelligence department of the Soviet CIA. He had tremendous and most interesting information for us in terms of the aspirations of intelligence, in terms of facilities developed by the CIA. Undoubtedly, it is one of the most productive sources that April 1985 has produced. The information that Ames provided at this meeting made it possible to identify two employees of the State Security Committee who were recruited by American intelligence, Valery Martinev and Sergei Matorin. Careful monitoring of them showed that these two really worked for the CIA. The consequences: he gave us a huge amount of information about the moles who worked for us, that is, the traitors who were in our special forces. No one had ever transmitted such a large amount before, and no one even suspected it. But there was one item on Ames's list that bothered the operatives. He had no information about his agent. He was able to find out only his place of work, the second main directorate of the KGB, that is, counterintelligence, the elite of the Soviet special services. Only the best of the best could get there. In the entire history of management, the moles in its ranks can be counted on the fingers of one hand. The selection was tough. 100 people were selected, 10 of them were retained, and 10 of them were checked later. To find the mysterious agent Cole, the counterintelligence agents created a special group in the strictest secrecy. The operation was called Two-Faced Genus.
The investigation was supervised by the deputy head of the Second Directorate, General Vitaly Bayarov, and Major Sergei Terechov was assigned to lead the development of the mall. Sergei Stepanovich Terechov, born in 1953, graduated from the KGB Higher School and worked in counterintelligence since 1976. During his years of service, he personally took part in secret operations outside the USSR. CIA officers came to the USSR disguised as journalists, travelers, and businessmen. But it was the safest to work under the guise of diplomatic status, which gives a person immunity. So most of the spy routes led to Novinsky Boulevard, where the US Embassy operated. The residence hall was located on the upper floors. There was also equipment on the roof that made it possible to listen to telephone cables. The people who worked at the embassy were the main target of surveillance for the KGB counterintelligence. Surveillance groups were constantly on duty around the diplomatic mission. The business trip to Moscow was a real recognition of the intelligence officer's professional skills. The people who worked in Moscow, they considered themselves the elite. This is actually the case. They admitted that the Soviet Union had a very strict counterintelligence regime. The agents who passed the Moscow school had excellent career prospects. And I must say that Michael fully justified this title. He was a regular at Moscow theaters, loved concerts, willingly picked up a guitar and sang well. He even released a record in his homeland in the USA. His artistry also helped him in his work. Michael was considered a true master of disguises and reincarnations. There are quite a few examples when they used inflatable mannequins and made up for an American diplomat. Clothes, wigs, whatever. In fact, the Americans were quite actively using this disguise technique, so he learned it well while still a cadet at school. Sellers had been settling in the capital of the USSR for several months when the station received information. A certain Soviet counterintelligence officer is offering his services as an informant. This man was Sergei Vorontsov. Why do traitors appear, including in intelligence? It's an absolutely amazing reason, but the first reason for cheating is profit. The second is that pride when a person feels that he is underestimated. The beginning of this betrayal was in November of the 84th, not at the CIA headquarters, but in the Moscow residential area of Chertanovo. KGB Major Sergei Vorontsov lived there with his family in a small office apartment. An experienced employee, an excellent operative, by the age of 37, he had gone from a simple operative to the position of deputy head of the department. It seemed like there was a bright future ahead, but all plans collapsed in one moment.
Vorontsov himself was sure that drinking was only a formal reason. He was a sharp, straightforward man, and he often clashed with his boss. And then probably an inconvenient deputy was simply removed. In his early 30s, he gets a job at the Moscow Department of State Security. It was at that time, of course, in Soviet times, it was a wonderful career growth. And suddenly he got a big demotion because of a simple conflict with the management. Something broke it here. With such marks in his personal file, Major Vorontsov lost all chances of further promotion. Vorontsov's plan was much more elegant. In the 80s, the furniture issue was acute in the USSR. Millions of Soviet families dreamed of Czech walls, Yugoslav sofas, and bedroom sets from Romania. I had to sign up for a queue and wait for months, or even years. American diplomats in Moscow were also happy to purchase furniture, but not consumer goods from the socialist camp countries, but pre-revolutionary antiques. It was sometimes sold in Soviet thrift stores. Exporting vintage headsets from the Soviet Union was a fairly common practice not only among employees of the American embassy, but also among European countries. A profitable business for them. One of these antique furniture lovers was the second secretary of the U.S. Embassy, John Feeney. He often visited a small thrift store on Pyatnitskaya Street in the center of Moscow. The KGB knew about this hobby, but Feeney was considered a clean diplomat. He had never been seen in contact with American intelligence, so there was no constant surveillance of him. Vorontsov took advantage of this. To prove the seriousness of his intentions, Vorontsov threw a note through Feeney's slightly open car window. In it, he described the methods of disguise known to Soviet counterintelligence used by the CIA in Moscow. It was a valuable gift. To establish contact with a new agent, they assigned a young, promising scout, Michael Sellers. Sellers' main task at this meeting was to find out who he was dealing with. The American armed himself with a dictaphone and walked for several hours with Stas, as Vorontsov introduced himself, through the streets of Moscow, trying to extract information from him. Vorontsov had no intention of leaving the country, and all he needed from the Americans was money. After analyzing the recording of the conversation, the CIA came to the conclusion that the new agent is very professional and can be a useful source of information. That's how Agent Cole appeared in the CIA file. It was bright. Vorontsov received 15,000 rubles from Sellers, an impressive amount at that time. For comparison, a Lada car cost about 7,000 rubles, and people had been saving that amount for years, and in 15 minutes you could take a swing at a brand new Volga. But Vorontsov wasn't interested in cars. With his first fee, he made a gift to his wife. He bought her a mink fur coat. In the mid-80s, buying such a wardrobe item was akin to a special operation. A high-quality natural fur coat could be freely purchased only in specialty stores for the nomenclature. There was only one way for ordinary people to buy at exorbitant prices from speculators. Did the major's wife know how much money had been used to purchase this mink? Of course not. Units that dedicate their wives and loved ones to espionage. It was his decision, it was his destiny. Vorontsov understood that he risked attracting unnecessary attention to himself, but for the sake of his family, he was ready for this. Sergei loved his wife very much and literally doted on his daughter. The family was small but very friendly. The operatives didn't know any of this at the time. The investigation team painstakingly analyzed the scant information about Agent Cole. To the Americans, the mole introduced himself as Stas. It was hardly his real name. Ames reported that the agent, according to him, had once traveled to Ireland. That's a clue. But the investigation was complicated by the strictest secrecy. No more than 10 people in the committee knew that work was underway to find an American intelligence agent in the ranks, because it is extremely difficult to work among your colleagues because they are all counterintelligence agents. Even by simply requesting the personal files of KGB officers traveling abroad, it was possible to scare off them all. The operatives had to work through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and manually sort through the files of all Soviet citizens who had visited Ireland over the years. It took about 4 months. When we wrote out this list, it turned out to be about a meter long, even more than a meter. We were already, in general, beginning to doubt very much whether we would find this person at all. In contact with the American curator, Vorontsov proposed a simple but effective system: a minimum of face-to-face meetings, calls at a strictly stipulated time when he went on night duty. The telephone itself was not in Vorontsov's office on Lubyanka, but on the desk of the duty officer. For several months, the mole supplied the American station with information about the upcoming KGB operations. He transferred all our operational surveillance capabilities to the American embassy, as we reveal. It was very important. Working for the CIA turned out to be a lucrative business. Vorontsov quickly got a taste for it. During the next communication session, he offered Sellers a personal meeting and warned, "I'll bring something." At some point, he suddenly pulled out a canister and started spraying the material into a clear plastic bag. It was spy dust. We knew it existed and was being used. We had tried to collect samples before,
but he was the first to give us the opportunity to analyze this substance. Vorontsov received 30,000 rubles from the Americans for a sample of the secret drug, a huge amount. And then the unexpected happened. An official statement was made by the US State Department. The Soviet Union was accused of using EMP devices against foreigners. The sensational news did not leave the pages of American newspapers for several weeks. However, this scandal gave the investigation team the opportunity to sharply narrow down the circle of suspects. The secret drug was used very sparingly, only during the most important operations. Access to the secret drug, Rubin, as it was called in the KGB, became an important factor in the investigation. But the overall picture still didn't add up. Only surveillance officers and some operatives could use Rubin, and apparently Vorontsov was a career intelligence officer. The investigation seemed to have reached a dead end again. But then Vorontsov made a mistake. An important prerequisite for the successful operation of any intelligence service in the world is an extensive network of informants. KGB operative Sergei Vorontsov also had his informants. One of them worked at the US Embassy. It was from her that the KGB learned the details of the lives of American diplomats. Vorontsov was obliged to carefully protect his assistant from exposure, but having managed to get a taste of easy money, he told his contact Michael Sellers her name. A coded telegram about a KGB informant working at the embassy immediately went to the CIA headquarters and got to Aldrich Ames, who informed the State Security Committee about it. Now Major Terikov could only bring up the girl's personal file in the KGB file cabinet.
Major Terikov had already noticed the name of senior operative Sergei Vorontsov. He fit the description of a mole well. He had access to the drug Rubin, and a few years ago he actually visited Ireland. Only one detail did not match. The suspect did not serve in the central office of the KGB, as the Americans were sure, but in the Moscow department. Nevertheless, Vitaly Boyarov decided to take Vorontsov under control. A surveillance post was set up in the building opposite the house where he lived, and the observers noticed obvious oddities. Expensive gifts for his wife and daughter, delicacies in the kitchen. Sergei Vorontsov was clearly living beyond his means. But the search of his workplace put an end to the collection of evidence. In the major's office, they found an almost empty bottle with the remains of the drug Rubin, spy dust, which he so generously shared with Michael. After that, it was decided to detain Vorontsov. They decided to take him right on the street. That evening, he finished work in high spirits, saying, "Sir will be home soon." The next second, he was already being handcuffed. And then, without wasting any time, the investigation team went to his house. Naturally, there were searches in the apartment. It was within the framework of an investigative action, but it was a tragedy. It was a disaster. It was tears. It was terrible pain for the family. The father is a traitor. The husband is a traitor. Extremely difficult. A week later, Sergei Vorontsov confessed that he had worked for the Americans and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Operation Two-Faced Janus was entering its final stage. It was necessary to take the second participant of the game, Michael Sellers. March of the 86th year, the CIA station in Moscow was going through difficult times. The network of agents was bursting at the seams. Their super valuable agent, aviation engineer Adolf Tolkachev, has not been in touch with the Americans for more than 6 months. Agent Cole's silence was also alarming. Has he been discovered too? But during another scheduled communication session, he suddenly picked up the phone and offered Sellers a personal meeting. On one hand, we had great interest in meeting Vorontsov. We thought he would answer some of our questions, but at the same time, we were very worried that he too had already been compromised. I went to this meeting thinking that there was at least a chance that it wouldn't end with an arrest. The meeting with Sellers was scheduled for March 10th. It was supposed to take place late in the evening. The KGB surveillance team took up positions near the embassy building.
Time passed, but the scout did not leave the building. A familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Red alert, this is Black Ronald Patterson. As he does every evening, he gets in the car and drives home. Where's Sellers? It turns out later that it was he who left the embassy building disguised as Patterson. Michael began identity transfer almost immediately after leaving the embassy. This technique, called identity transfer, was a situation in which one person, like me who was under surveillance, was paired with a person who was not of interest to the KGB. This included the use of prosthetic masks and an extensive wardrobe. For the next few hours, Sellers drove haphazardly around Moscow, boarded random buses, ducked into doorways and doorways to once again change his appearance. Finally, deciding that there was no tail, the scout went out to the meeting place and saw Vorontsov from a distance. When I went over and started talking to him, I noticed that he had obviously lost a lot of weight. He was shaking. The capture of the American contact had to be carried out as quickly as possible without giving him a chance to destroy possible evidence. The operation was commanded by the deputy head of the Alpha Group, KGB Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Zaitsev. The capture took seconds. Sellers was so stunned that he didn't even try to hide. They put him in a car and took him to the KGB reception area. I was sitting next to Sellers, controlling his movement. Well, I see he has a mustache there. I took off my mustache once. There is, oh, mister, is that you? A few days after the detention, the American intelligence officer was declared persona non grata and expelled from the Soviet Union. But before that, on the eve of departure, the most artistic CIA agent managed to make a spectacular appearance on stage for the last time. He gave a CD as a gift to us, knowing that he was under surveillance, no less than on Red Square on a frontal place. In the story of Spy Dust, Michael Sellers escaped with a slight fright. The same cannot be said for the other participant. Sergei Vorontsov awaited trial. The verdict was harsh. He was sentenced to capital punishment. And as for the Spy Dust? In February 1986, 6 months after the scandal, the U.S. State Department made a new statement. American experts conducted a new examination of the composition and concluded that the Soviet drug does not pose a danger to human health.